Hello and welcome to Artists for Everyone, and today we're going to paint a spring crocus because they are just starting to pop up here, and if we don't get any more snow, maybe they'll bloom. But anyways, it's a really nice simple project. Sometimes crocuses look like a daunting flower to draw, so we're going to start with our basic drawing. And let me just go over the materials we're going to use. I'm going to use my Strathmore watercolor postcard and have it in a portrait position, so it's lengthwise like this. I have my beautiful Wildthorne Artists for Everyone palette that we will be using, but I'll also give you ideas for other colors to use from watercolor sets you might already have. I have my Sennelier 000 squirrel mop. Any pointed round in like a size 6 or 8 would be fine. I have a watercolor pencil to draw. This is an Albrecht Dürer by Faber-Castell in a light gray. You can also use just any number 2 pencil. That's fine. I have an eraser, and I have a roll of paper towels here and some water to use. I also have a little palette here that I can mix some colors if I need to. We won't really be mixing colors, but we will need to dilute some color. Okay, so we're going to start with our drawing, and I'm going to begin with just a number 2 pencil, and I'm going to draw a diamond shape. Okay, sort of here. So just a diamond shape like so. All right, and this is basically giving us the structure for a flower, and it makes it a little bit easier for us to draw. So I'm going to move this over just a little bit so I have more room. And I want to start by drawing the stem. So at the bottom of my diamond shape, I'm going to draw a line straight down. Okay, my sweater is shedding. And then I'm going to come over here on the other side of it and draw another line. This sort of follows that one. All right, about like that. And then I'm going to draw a leaf. So about 2/3 of the way down, I'm going to start. And I'm going to draw just sort of a line coming up that goes to a point, and then I'll bring it back down until it meets. So that is the basic structure of our crocus flower. Now for the petals. So if you looked at a real crocus flower, it might sort of intimidate you because you've got petals that are in back and are in front and coming from all different directions. But remember that we are not trying to draw an exact version of any specific crocus. We are trying to draw the illusion of a crocus, something joyful for us to do without any stress. If you want to pick a crocus or bring one inside and try to draw it from life and really pay attention to it and do it as a seeing drawing practice, that is wonderful. And I highly recommend that you try that. But for today, we're just going to draw a basic crocus flower. So I'm going to start here in the center, and I'm going to draw about halfway up, so the midpoint in my diamond. I'm going to start with like a teardrop shape, sort of a rounded diamond that comes down like that, okay? And then over on this side, I'm going to draw another one. So I'll start a little bit above the edge of the diamond and bring it down to here, and then bring this one down like that, all right? And then I'm going to go on the other side, and I'm going to do the same. I'm going to start up here just a little bit on top of my diamond, bring it down. All right, and then maybe one about here. And I'm using the diamond as a guide. You see how everything kind of falls within that shape? And then I'm going to draw another one, starting at the top. just a little bit above, sort of bring it down. And then I'll draw another one over here that kind of connects. And then I'm going to draw a little shape sort of like this into my flower. Now we have a lot of extra lines here. So if you want to, you could take a screenshot of this drawing, okay, if you want to look at it more carefully and practice it a few times. Nothing wrong with that. So now that I have my drawing done, I'm going to use an eraser, and I ended up using my pencil for the whole thing, but that's okay. You can also use the watercolor pencil if you'd like to. I'm going to use my eraser, and this is just an old stick eraser that I have. You can use any kind of eraser. And I'm going to remove that original diamond shape and any line that's inside those petals that we drew. So where they overlap one another, we want to remove those lines. Okay? And then I have a little Hake brush that I use to brush off eraser dust. You could use a feather, old cosmetic brush. But as you can see, there, I'm just removing the extra lines. I don't need those anymore after my original drawing is done. And now I have a very basic crocus flower. So pretty simple, okay? You can go back and reconnect areas that I accidentally erased. And we should be good. Okay. Now because I used a pencil, if it's a little bit, if your drawing's a little bit dark, you could use an eraser to just sort of lighten it up a bit. Although it doesn't really matter that much. But sometimes I just like to get rid of some of the extra graphite. And just lighten it up here and there. And I think that's fine. Okay. All right, so our basic flower shape is now done. And we're going to start by putting a layer of color on all of the petals, except for this little one that we drew right here. We're going to leave this one blank. And we're also going to put a layer on the stem and the leaf. So I'm going to begin. I'm going to move my paints back over so you can see them. And let me just make sure they're on camera. I can't tell. I'm sorry, guys. Let me just plug this in and make sure. Okay, I think that's good. All right, so we're going to start with a water glaze. And I'm going to start with this petal right here. And I'm going to put down a water glaze, being very careful with the tip of my brush to stay within that petal shape. We're going to paint one petal at a time. If I have too much water, I can just wick some of it off with my paper towels. But I'm just putting a water glaze on that petal, one petal at a time. I don't want it to be too wet, so if I have too much water, I can take my clean, damp brush and just sort of wipe over it again to make sure I don't have any like puddles of water. So once that's done, I'm going to take my wood violet, which is a beautiful purple color, and just get a little bit on the tip of my brush. And I'm just going to drop it in to that water glaze and let it whoosh around, because wood violet does that whooshing that we love. And then I'll take my brush, whoop, and pull my brush around the edges of the petal to clean up my edges and just sort of soften it. Now, I don't want to mess with it too much. I can tell I didn't have enough water on there. But you'll see. Each time we do one, it'll get better. So I don't want to mess with it too much. I want the paint to sort of whoosh around and make these little mottled patterns, okay? So now we're going to move to the next petal up here. I don't want to paint the one that's right next to it because those paints could mix together. So I'm just going to turn my paper and I'm going to work on this petal. So again, water glaze first. Wick up some of the extra water. And then take a little bit of my wood violet on my brush, drop it in, let it whoosh around, spread around, a little bit more. And then dry my brush off and use the tip of my brush to go around the edges to coax that paint out to the edge and just sort of clean up our edges. So there's two. Now I'm going to go over to this petal. So same thing, I'm going to take my water and I'm going to be careful when I come up to that edge of the other petal that we painted. So I'm not going to touch it, I'm just going to go right next to it. Put my water glaze down. Pick up some of my wood violet, drop it in, let it whoosh around. See how it touched that one. And that's okay. If it happens, it happens. We try not to let it happen, but sometimes it does. I cleaned my brush, dried it off, and now I'm running around the edges of that petal, coaxing the paint toward the edge and cleaning up my edges. Okay, so now I have 3 of the petals painted. I'm going to let this dry for a minute before I continue on to the other petals. And in the meantime, I'm going to paint my stem and my leaf. So once again, I'm going to paint a water glaze, and I'm going to start at the top of the stem, and I'm going to paint a water glaze all the way down the stem, not on the leaf, but just on the stem. So I'll go over it twice to make sure I have a nice water glaze all the way down my stem. And then I'm going to pick up some of my ochre léger, which is a yellow ochre. And I'm going to drop it right at the top of the water glaze where it meets the flower. Rinse my brush, and then I'm going to pick up some of my viridian. So you could use sap green, or you could mix a green with blue and yellow. And I'm going to start up here, and I'm going to pull the tip of my brush down the right side of my stem, all the way down to the bottom. Clean my brush, dry it off, and then I'm going to start at the top on the left side, and I'm going to pull my clean brush all the way down the left side. And what that does is it coaxes the green over toward the left. So it's heavier on the right side, and then it's coaxed over toward the left. Okay, that's all I'm going to do now for the stem. But I'm going to do the same exact thing for the leaf. So I'll start with a water glaze at the top, pull my water glaze all the way down my leaf to where it meets the stem. It's okay if they touch a little bit. You'll see. So pulling that water glaze all the way down. I'm going to pick up some of that ochre léger and drop it right in the center. And then I'm going to pick up my viridian, and I'm going to start at the top, the very tippy top with the top tip of my brush, and I'm going to pull it down the right side, let it mix and mingle with that ochre léger, that's fine, all the way down to the bottom. Okay, then I'm going to dry my brush off, and I'm going to take from the top and I'm going to pull down the left side of my leaf, just softening everything and sort of coaxing it over. So it doesn't look finished yet because it isn't. Okay, we're going to put another layer on that later. This is just the base layer. Now, these are probably dry enough that we can paint next to them. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to start with a water glaze on the petals that we haven't painted yet. one petal at a time. I'm going to pull the water glaze down. If your petals are not dry yet, then just wait until they dry until you do this step. There is a lot of waiting in watercolor, but that's nice. I can do some dishes, I can make some tea, I can do a little yoga. So I'm putting that water glaze down on this petal, picking up some wood violet, dropping it in, letting it whoosh around, drying my brush off, and using the tip of my brush to coax the paint to the edges. They may not go all the way to the edge, and that's fine. We don't really need them to. We just want to make sure our edges are clean. Okay? Then I'm going to turn my paper, and I'm going to do this one. Remember, we're leaving this petal white. So water glaze, dry my brush if I need to. Again, I'm using the tip of my brush to be careful around those edges. And it does take some practice. Grab some wood violet, let it whoosh, just drop it in, dry my brush, and pull my brush around the edges. Make sure I have nice clean edges. Okay, and I have one more petal to do. Start down here at the bottom, put my water glaze on with the tip of my brush. Dry my brush if I need to and soak up any extra water, but just make sure I have that nice water glaze down. Grab some wood violet, let it, drop it in and let it whoosh. Dry my brush and run that tip of my brush around the edges just to clean up the edges and make sure the paint is even as possible. So you'll notice that I have this modeling effect, and that's what I want. Okay, I want that sort of dreamy modeling effect. Now I need to let this dry completely before I carry on. So I'm going to turn the video off, and I am going to get a cup of tea. We're going to let this dry, and then we will be back to finish our crocus. Okay, so my painting is now dry, and I think because I use the pencil and it's fairly dark, I'm going to use a kneaded eraser and just sort of lightly remove any of the pencil marks that I can, which may not be many. But I can lightly rub the kneaded eraser around the drawing just to see if I can lift any of that extra pencil. Okay, that's pretty good. All right, so now we're going to start putting the final layer of paint on. And what we're going to do is we're going to put some lines in direction of form onto our petals. And we're still going to use the wood violet, but this time I'm going to take some of the wood violet, and if you don't have wood violet, any purple watercolor will do, like Winsor violet or dioxazine violet. You can also make a violet by using a cool red and a warm blue. So I have a nice little puddle of wood violet here. All right, and I'm going to start with this petal in the center, and I'm going to start at the top and just paint a little of the purple, the violet color on, and I'm going to pull it down in just little sections. I'm not painting the whole thing, and I'm leaving white spaces, but do you see how I'm kind of following the shape of the petal? All right, And I can dry my brush off and just make sure that like down here it meets nice. All right, so just little directional lines. I'll take some more and I'll go to the next petal and start at the top and pull it down and just pull some lines of the wood violet. So I'm not painting the whole thing. I'm just sort of taking the tip of my brush and putting some lines. Okay? And I'm going to keep going around. I don't need to worry so much about painting the petals next to one another because I'm not going all the way to the edge. All right, so I can start at this one, start at the top, pull a few lines down, sort of following the directions of the petals. And when I get to where the petal comes behind and meets the other petals, I can sort of make it a little bit darker there, right? So I'm moving around my flower, starting at the top, pulling lines down, at the bottom here, where it goes behind the other petal in the front, I can just make sure. See that? So I'm making like little striped patterns. Each petal can be different. We're not too worried about that. I can go over to this one, start it at the top, pull some lines down using the tip of my brush, just sort of following the direction that that petal creates. Okay, and then on my final petal, the same thing. Start at the top, using the tip of my brush to pull some lines down. There. Now right away, before this dries, I'm going to grab some of the Cobalt Blue Premier. So you could use a regular Cobalt Blue or French Ultramarine Blue, any kind of blue, but put some water in it so it's nice and light. And I'm going to take the tip of my brush and just pull some lines through with that, just a few here and there. See, I'm just flicking my brush through. Not too concerned, just giving it a little bit of that blue color here and there. There. All right? Now, we're going to let this dry before we add more to the petals and before we do our final little golden stamen over here. So now I'm going to move back down to the stem and the leaf. And I'm going to start with a water glaze again. I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did before. So I'm starting with a water glaze, pulling it all the way down my stem, and we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to take some ochre leger or yellow ochre and drop it in, and then some viridian. And starting toward the top, we're going to pull the viridian down the right side and let it just sort of flow across. All right, so it's just, excuse me, it's just emphasizing one side of the stem more than the other. Okay, and the same thing with the leaf. We're going to put our water glaze on. I'm going to turn my painting. So I'm putting the water glaze on the entire leaf. Start with my ochre leger and just drop some in the center. And then grab my viridian, and I'll start at the top so it's darker at the tip. And let that viridian just sort of flow over and pull it down all the way along the right side till it meets. Clean my brush, dry it off, and then use the tip of my brush to pull it down the left side, coaxing that paint over toward the left. Now when I get to where the leaf meets the stem, I can use the tip of my brush, just sort of blend it, and then just sort of pull it down the stem if you need to. Okay, so now my leaf and my stem are complete. I could add a tiny bit more, I think, of the ochre léger to the top. I really want that to be that golden yellow color sort of mixing with the green, traveling down like that. Okay, I'm really happy with that now. So now I'm going to go back to my flower, and I'm going to use some of the wood violet again. So I'll make my puddle, and all I'm going to do is where the petals tuck in behind one another, they are going to be darker. So let me point that out on here. So you can see where this petal goes behind those two, it's a little darker. Where this one starts to go under, it's a little darker. This one, this one, this one, and the bottom of this one. Okay? So I'm going to take some wood violet, and using the tip of my brush, being careful where I put the paint, I'm just going to put in a little bit of wood violet. And you know what? I don't think this is completely dry yet. So let me just soften that. Okay. Yeah, it wasn't totally dry yet. So let me just, let's see here. I have a hair dryer. I don't typically recommend using a hair dryer on our watercolor paintings because it does change the finish of them. And what I have is this little heat craft tool. It's very old, and it just puts out some heat that will help dry the paint. But again, I don't recommend it unless you really, really need it. If you're teaching or for some reason you need to speed things up. But I can use this to just lightly dry it. We really want our paints to have the time to mix and mingle and to do what they do. So I don't recommend doing this, but I'm going to do it now. It also tends to curl our paper up. The heat does. Okay, so I can take my paper and just lightly coax it back to being flat. Okay, so now I can go back and I can take my wood violet and I can fill in where it might be a little bit darker. So you see, wherever the petals go behind another petal, I can fill in with a little bit more. And I can flick this out to soften any edges. So over here, the same thing, where this one goes behind, I'm just putting a little bit more of the wood violet. And then I'll just flick it out. See what I mean by that? I'm just taking the tip of my brush and just sort of flicking it. Take a little bit more. I'm going to put some down here at the base. Make it a little bit darker, then flick it out a little bit. And a little more wood violet. And then a little bit on this side, so I'm edging that the other petal that's in front. And then just flicking it out to make sure I don't have any hard lines. And then I'll do it one more time, right down here where this petal goes behind those two. Sort of comes down and then just sort of flick it. Make sure that all my edges are nice and neat. Okay, so all that did was give it a little bit of depth, okay? So for the final step, we're going to put some gold onto where the pistil and stamen would be. And I'm going to start with just the ochre léger, since we've already been using that other places. And I'm going to paint a light layer of ochre léger onto this little extra section. It doesn't matter if I touch the purple a little bit, it's fine. And then I'm going to take my sun gold mica and I'm just going to drop it in little dots, even going onto the purple a little bit here and there. Okay, that's it. Just dropping that gold right on top. And when it dries, the gold gets very shiny and shimmery. Okay, so that is my crocus flower. That's really all there is to it. One final thing that sometimes I do, if I feel like I want a little bit more maybe blue in one section, I can take a little my paintbrush just sort of wet and just put some water on and just take a little bit of that blue again and just drop it in, just to give it a little bit of blue in the front. I just felt like it needed that. All right, there is my crocus flower, and you can see that each time I do them, they're a little bit different, okay? It doesn't have to be perfect ever, but it still looks like a beautiful spring crocus. I'm very, very happy with it. And when I'm done, I put my monogram on the bottom. And because it's a Strathmore watercolor postcard, I can send it in the mail to someone to bring them some joy. So I hope you enjoyed this project. Really simple, fresh, pretty painting for spring, a little crocus. I will leave the materials that I used in the comment section below. Also substitutions in case you don't have the Artist for Everyone palette. And any questions that you have, please feel free to ask me. I love answering your questions. And thanks again. I always appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.